Welcome to the Quantum Business Book Club. We will finish this year looking at some of the Western world's favorite fantasy fiction novels, because these authors and these creators and these visionaries saw what was possible. I call it quantum business because every page I open bends time. I can sit across the table from genius like Huxley, Tolkien, and Le Guin. I can trade notes with minds who built entire realities during collapse. And now you are invited to join me. Each of these books reshaped how I lead, create, and play the long game. For me, reading isn't consumption. It's also not distraction. It helps me play the game to win. In fact, these books allow me to be the game designer. So this season is our Fantasy and Magic series, The Myth Makers of Revolution. Every time the world industrializes, someone rediscovers magic. I'm Nicole VZ, and this is your field manual for founders and CEOs, creative visionaries, artists, leaders, and those of you willing to build something amidst the destruction. This is the next age of business in the wreckage of the last. Each week, we will pull a thread from writers who faced war, tyranny, and mechanization and turned them into myth. They built the map to hope. From Soviet satire to celestial wonder, we decode the leadership patterns that kept humanity awake inside the darkness. This isn't nostalgia. This is navigation. Welcome. This is where it all started. This is the book that inspired this entire series. And I thought it was going to be the last, but then I stumbled upon one more childhood tome that felt really relevant and a great way to kick off the new year. So whenever you're listening to this, welcome. I think it's New Year's Eve, 2025. And I'm so thrilled that you made it through this series with me. I've been having, a moment, a year, a life. We all have. And I'm more one to binge read than I am binge watch. There's a variety of reasons behind that. But I found myself binge reading this book, a very familiar, very fantastical story. And as I was skipping around to my favorite parts, which tend to be the ones where you think it might all end, and then there is a spark of hope in utter darkness, and the protagonist prevails. Most people think The Lord of the Rings is a fantasy about elves and hobbits, monsters and magic, wizards and wars, a darkness stealing the light, the final war between good and evil. And that first read isn't wrong. It's just not enough. What Tolkien actually wrote is one of the most serious moral investigations of power I've ever read. And I say that, and it sounds hyperbolic because I think about Machiavelli. I think about The Art of War. I think about some of these books that purposefully and overtly wrote about the struggle of power. And the thing is Tolkien composed this work not from distance or abstraction, but from lived experience in a world war during bureaucratic perversion. And he was watching what I think he thought was the slow collapse of human conscience when crushed in a vice grip. And it occurred to me that The Lord of the Rings is not about heroes and villains or good versus evil. It's actually a story about limits. And Tolkien wrote it while the modern world was actively proving how badly it needed them. As I was reading this book, I thought, this is not just wildly relevant, like I've thought every book in this series is for our times now. But I had to wonder, what was Tolkien living through? Because it feels like I'm reading some kind of a map. And when I noticed that he started this book in 1938 while living in Oxfordshire, England, I thought, aha. And that is what inspired this series. And I know I'm repeating myself now, so thank you. J.R.R. Tolkien was born in 1892. By the time World War II broke out in September 1939, he was 47 years old, and that matters. Britain's conscription at the outbreak of the war was applied primarily to men aged between 18 and 41. So Tolkien was outside the standard draft range. He had just missed forced service in both wars. He was also a married academic with children and a university professor at Oxford. He was not called up to the front line for service again, but not drafted doesn't mean he was detached. He lived through nightly air raids, rationing, civil defense obligations, the anxiety of invasion, and the steady and total pressure of war. He ended up conscripting himself as an air raid warden in 1941 and was involved in civil defense. He was also briefly considered for cryptographic work before being told his services were not required. He had fought in World War I at the Battle of Somme in 1916, and he was young enough that in the research that I did, he felt like he watched warfare obliterate humanity at scale, but he watched from the trend. I mean, he watched from the sidelines, really. And he felt like he watched all of his friends, all of his childhood friends get killed. And that never leaves a person. So when World War II started, it wasn't a shock. It actually confirmed his worst conclusions. Tolkien's reputation as an insulated or quote unquote escapist writer says more about modern discomfort with myth than about Tolkien himself. His experience of these two world wars and his own letters show a writer acutely aware of ideology, power, and the human cost of industrialized control. Before the war even began in 1938, a German publisher told Tolkien to verify his Aryan ancestry as a condition for publication. Tolkien responded with rage. He rejected the premise outright, condemned racial doctrine as pernicious and unscientific, and made clear that in his own moral framework, Jewish ancestry would be a distinction, not a disqualification, and a distinction he did not share. This was principled, and Tolkien expressed explicit contempt for Hitler and Nazi ideology in private correspondence, but also publicly. I mean, that pernicious and unscientific claim was a direct quote. Tolkien understood that anti-Semitism was a moral sickness and not a political conversation. And it's worth getting into this because Tolkien, I'm not suggesting Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings as response to the Holocaust, or even as a systemic sort of documented system of what was happening. But public knowledge of those details was spreading unevenly during the war and really only became known after the liberation and conclusion of the internment camps, the death camps. So Tolkien didn't explicitly understand what was happening, but I do believe he was writing about racial ideology, totalitizing state power, the mechanization of human life, and the moral numbness required to sustain these societal failures. But he understood something even more dangerous. He understood that evil doesn't require hatred. It requires efficiency, obedience, a willingness to subordinate our conscience to the system. And I do think that permeates almost every sentence of this book. Lord of the Rings is not a reactionary book written in a single emotional register. It is a long meditation composed while the world burned, regrouped, and tried to convince itself that catastrophe could be better managed by systems. By the time the final manuscript was completed, Tolkien had watched 2 world wars devastate Europe, Industrialization accelerate centralized power entrench itself as quote unquote necessary, and technological progress outrun moral restraint. He did not believe that the problem had been solved. He believed that the problem had been normalized. Tolkien famously rejected strict allegory. He did not want the ring to stand for a specific weapon or regime, but rejecting allegory does not mean rejecting the comparison, the metaphor, the purpose, right? Tolkien was doing something subtler and ambitious. He was asking, what kind of power does not corrupt? What kind of power does not corrupt the soul or the one who holds it? And his answer is deeply unsettling. He suggests the only kind of power that wouldn't corrupt is a power that can't and won't seek domination. In Middle-earth, power is not evil because it is violent. It is evil because it bypasses moral relationship. The ring does not tempt characters with cruelty. It tempts them with solutions, clarity, control, efficiency, this ability to impose order. These aren't villainous desires. These are managerial ones. Tolkien understands that the most dangerous people in a collapsing civilization are not sadists. They are idealists who believe they can carry power responsibly on behalf of others. This is why the ring destroys the wise first. Okay, so that is my premise. What actually happens? I'm going to suggest, stripped of my own perspective of this lens that I've been looking through all these books with, the story is this. A ring exists that concentrates power into a single object. Anyone who holds it gains the ability to dominate others, but at the cost of their own sovereignty, their own integrity. Over time, the ring erodes judgment, compassion, and self. The ring cannot be used safely by anyone. When it comes into the possession of Frodo, an ordinary hobbit with no ambition for power, a choice is made that defines the entire narrative. The ring must be destroyed, not wielded. A fellowship forms to protect Frodo and accompany him part of the way. The journey fractures the group. The burden isolates Frodo. The task proves too heavy for any single person to complete alone. Crucially, Frodo does not win through strength or moral purity. He fails at the end. The ring is destroyed through a convergence of mercy, endurance, weakness, loyalty, and unintended consequence. But Middle-earth is not saved. And it's certainly not saved by power or domination. And in fact, Middle-earth is saved by the refusal to dominate. So these characters exist to test a single ethical question. Frodo carries responsibility without desiring authority. His arc shows the cost of prolonged moral burden and the limits of individual endurance. Sam represents loyalty as infrastructure. He is not brave in isolation. He is brave because he refuses abandonment. Gandalf understands power well enough to refuse it. His wisdom is restraint, not command. Aragorn embodies leadership that matures slowly. He does not seize power. He becomes worthy of it by refusing shortcuts. Boromir shows how good intentions combined with fear lead to collapse. He believes power can be used for good, but falls quickly. Galadriel confronts the temptation of benevolent domination and survives only by refusing it entirely. Gollum is not a monster. He's the long-term consequence of isolation, obsession, and possession. The Fellowship, one might argue, is the real protagonist, shared burden is Tolkien's answer to corruption. Every book in this series diagnosed a different failure mode of civilization. This one integrates them. Lord of the Rings does not teach us how to overthrow evil. It teaches us how to not become it. It is a book written by a man who had watched power scale beyond conscience and understood that the future would not depend on stronger systems, but on people capable of restraint, relationship, and refusal. That is why we're talking about this book. That is why this is my last episode of 2025. And that is why 2026 will begin after the quest. Tolkien's final gift was not hope as optimism. It's hope as discipline. I'm going to repeat that again. Tolkien's final gift is not hope as optimism. It is hope as discipline. I needed to hear that myself right now. I don't know if you heard that in that sigh. The mistake most people make when reading Lord of the Rings is assuming the enemy is Sauron. It's not. Sauron is not the engine of the story. He's the end point, the visible concentration of a logic that has already taken hold long before he appears on the battlefield. The real antagonist in Tolkien's world is a way of thinking, a pattern so persuasive it can inhabit heroes, institutions, and entire civilizations without ever announcing its evil. That pattern is domination, not violence, not cruelty, domination. The belief that order justifies control, that safety requires centralization, that power, once acquired, can be managed cleanly by the right people for the right reasons under the right circumstances. Tolkien had watched this logic operate in the real world at scale with catastrophic consequences, and he understood something crucial. Domination does not begin with malice. It begins with certainty. Domination isn't chaos. It's over-organization. One of Tolkien's most unsettling moves is that Mordor is not disorderly. It is efficient. It runs on hierarchy, surveillance, extraction, and obedience. Everything has a function. Everything is optimized. Everything is oriented toward a single end. Does this sound familiar? This is not the imagery of madness. It is the imagery of administration, the perfect bureaucracy. Mordor is not evil because it is wild. It is evil because it is total, because nothing exists outside of its logic. No local meaning, no moral friction, no room for refusal. Evil in Tolkien's world isn't irrational. It is instrumentally rational. It makes sense on paper, and that is precisely what makes it dangerous. Also, the ring is not a weapon. The ring is often misunderstood as like some kind of, weapon of mass destruction, a super weapon, but I think it's a technology. Weapons act outward. The ring acts inward. It does not force obedience through terror. It restructures desire. It narrows perception. It trains the bearer to see domination as responsibility. The ring does not whisper, rule them. It whispers, fix this. It offers clarity instead of complexity, control instead of uncertainty, speed instead of deliberation, outcomes instead of process. The ring doesn't corrupt by making people cruel. It corrupts by making them certain. Tolkien understands something modern psychology would later confirm. Atrocity does not require hatred. It requires conviction without restraint. This is where Tolkien becomes genuinely uncomfortable for modern readers. The ring doesn't just tempt the weak. It tempts the capable. It tempts our heroes. Boromir wants the ring to defend his people, to end the war, to do what must be done. His failure is not ambition. It is fear combined with competence. Gandalf refuses the ring not because he lacks power, but because he understands how quickly good intentions become tyranny once domination enters the equation. Galadriel sees the future clearly. a world that is orderly, beautiful, safe, and entirely bent to her will, and she rejects it, not because she is naive, but because she is honest. Tolkien's claim is ruthless. The more intelligent, effective, and well-intentioned you are, the more dangerous unchecked power becomes. Domination doesn't need villains. It just needs exceptions. The technocrat as fallen steward. Sauron is not a tyrant. He's a technocrat. That distinction is meaningful. Hear me out. He does not rise through rage or charisma. He rises through expertise, through access to systems, through the belief that he understands the machinery of the world better than others do. Sauron does not overthrow anyone. He optimizes. He industrializes Isengard. He replaces living systems with production capacity. He standardizes armies. He builds furnaces not because he hates the world, but because he believes efficiency is the only moral response to existential threat. This is not the voice of a demagogue. It's the voice of management. Saruman speaks in the language of inevitability, of realism, of hard choices. He frames domination not as desire, but as necessity. The world is too dangerous. The world is too complex, too fragile, he argues. The world cannot be left to the slow, sentimental, or the unqualified. Sound familiar? In the modern world, power no longer concentrates primarily in crowns or even armies. It concentrates in platforms, on channels, within infrastructures and algorithms, capital flows, and technical systems so complex they outrun democratic accountability. The new wizards do not wear robes. They speak in metrics, in scale, in disruption, in optimization, in speed. This isn't a bipartisan issue. This is a pattern. It is important to be clear about this. Tolkien is not making a left versus right argument. He's not even picking a side. It's not even good or evil. He's simply observing how power behaves once it reaches scale. Domination is politically promiscuous. It attaches itself to whatever ideology allows it to move fastest. It wears whatever language grants it legitimacy. On the left, it appears as moral urgency that justifies coercion. On the right, it appears as order enforced without consent. In the center, it appears as technocratic inevitability. Different vocabularies, same mechanism. The ring doesn't care why you want it. It only cares that you do. The most dangerous phrase, and I quote, "This is for the greatest good, the greater good." No one in The Lord of the Rings sets out to be evil. They set out to be effective. Again and again, Tolkien shows the same failure mode. Someone decides the situation is too dire for restraint. The delay is irresponsible, that power must be centralized because the stakes are too high. That is not villainous. That's crisis. It's logic. But Tolkien had watched crisis and logic justify the destruction of landscapes, cultures, and lives. The Ring doesn't invent the justification. It just accelerates it. This is what I believe is Tolkien's uncompromising position. You cannot use the ring to defeat the ring. You cannot dominate domination into submission. You cannot centralize power to eliminate the dangers of centralized power. There's no enlightened technocrat solution in this story, no benevolent manager of ultimate control, no moral override that makes domination safe. The only ethical response is refusal, not passive resistance, but active restraint, shared burden, endurance without shortcuts. By the end of this book, Tolkien wants you to see something very clearly. The danger is not the enemy outside of the gates. It is the internalization of domination as common sense. Once a society decides that efficiency, speed, and control outrank consent, relationship, and moral limits, the machine no longer needs a dark lord. It runs itself. And the moment you adopt the enemy's logic, you've already lost. So if domination is the machine, if certainty and control are the seduction, then the real question becomes this: what kind of strength survives without becoming the thing it resists? That's where Tolkien turns. Not to kings, not to conquerors, but to fellowship. So the only system that survives power, from Tolkien's perspective, I think, is the fellowship. If domination is the machine, fellowship is not its opposite, it's its antidote. Not because it is softer, not because it distributes what domination distills. The fellowship is decentralized, asynchronous, emergent, adaptive, flowing. Tolkien does not answer the problem of power with rebellion, overthrow, or moral superiority. He answers it with something far more structurally subversive. It is this shared purpose, this shared responsibility, this shared burden. Fellowship isn't friendship either. It is architecture. Modern readers may interpret the fellowship sentimentally, like it's about loyalty or companionship or found family. And I mean, even I remember thinking like, oh, the band broke up. And then I'm all overjoyed when the band gets back together. But that misses the point. The fellowship is not an emotional support group. It is a governance model. It is Tolkien's answer to the question domination cannot solve. How do you move power through a system without allowing it to accumulate? The fellowship is deliberately small, heterogeneous, and fragile. Different races, different competencies, different relationships to power, no single point of authority. That is not inefficiency, it's design. Tolkien understood what modern systems theory would later formalize. Centralized systems are fast but brittle. Distributed systems are slower but resilient. Fellowship slows power down. Often one of the most misunderstood moments in the story is the breaking of the fellowship. Readers often experience it as a failure, me too. Tolkien presents it as an inevitability. The fellowship was never meant to remain intact. It exists to get the ring moving, not to carry it forever. Prolonged proximity to ultimate power destabilizes any system, no matter how well-intentioned. This isn't pessimism, it is realism. Power isolates, even among friends. So Tolkien allows the fellowship to fracture, not because relationship failed, but because no structure can fully neutralize domination once it is carried too long by a single being. This is why Frodo must eventually walk alone, and why he cannot survive alone. Sam steps up to be the anti-hero. And in this antithesis, Tolkien creates a hero that can actually be trusted. If Tolkien believed in heroes, Samwise Gamgee would not matter this much, but Sam matters more than anyone. Sam has no strategic vision, no political ambition, no appetite for power. He does not want to fix the world. He wants to care for one person. That's not weakness. It's constraint. It's limits. Sam's loyalty acts as a stabilizing force when Frodo's inner world begins to collapse under pressure. He does not argue with Frodo's burden. He does not optimize it. He does not offer solutions. He just stays. In a system saturated with domination logic, presence becomes resistance. And Frodo must fail. This is one of Tolkien's most mature choices. Frodo does not succeed because he is pure. He succeeds because he is carried long enough for the system to hold. At the final moment, Frodo cannot let go of the ring. After years of moral injury, isolation, and psychological erosion, his will breaks. That's not a flaw in the story. It's the point. Tolkien refuses the fantasy that individual integrity is infinite. He insists that no one can carry absolute power indefinitely without being altered by it. Salvation comes not from moral perfection, but from interdependence, mercy, and unintended consequence. That is Tolkien's quiet refusal of hero worship. Gollum is not redeemed. He is integrated, and that matters. Tolkien does not resolve evil by eliminating it cleanly. He resolves it by refusing to flatten complexity. Mercy in this story is not a feeling. It is a strategic decision to keep the moral field wide enough for outcomes domination cannot predict. Had Frodo or Bilbo killed Gollum when it would have been reasonable, the ring would not have been destroyed. That's not romanticism. It's an argument that systems which eliminate anomaly, dissent, or inconvenience in the name of efficiency also eliminate their future opportunities. Mercy preserves optionality. Domination destroys it. Aragorn embodies power that waits. Aragorn is not crowned because he is strong. He is supported and endorsed because he waited. He spent most of the story refusing authority. He does not centralize control. He does not override others. He earns trust through service, patience, and presence. This is Tolkien's model of legitimate leadership. Power that arrives before relationship is domination. Power that arrives after trust is stewardship. Aragorn's kingship works precisely because it is constrained by humility, memory, and community. And this isn't idealism. At this point, modern listeners get uncomfortable. I just marveled at my use of modern listeners. Anywho, this all sounds slow, relational, and inefficient. Yeah, that's Tolkien's entire argument. Fellowship cannot outpace domination in the short term. It cannot match its speed, its spectacle, or its scale. But domination cannot sustain meaning. It cannot emulate trust, and domination is not coherence over time. Fellowship trades velocity for durability. And Tolkien, writing after two world wars, is clear-eyed about which one survives. So what does that mean for us, the modern reader? Fellowship doesn't mean consensus. It doesn't mean being nice. It's not the absence of conflict. Fellowship means power is never carried alone, authority is distributed, speed is constrained by relationship, and no one is allowed to become indispensable. That is not anti-technology. It is anti-centralization, anti-concentration, not anti-leadership, anti-exceptionalism. Fellowship is Tolkien's refusal of the fantasy that the right person armed with enough power can save the world. The victory at the end of Lord of the Rings is not the defeat of Sauron. It is the survival of moral limits. Middle-earth does not emerge stronger. It emerges humbler, wounded, altered, unable to return to what it was. That's the point. Systems that survive domination are not triumphant. They are careful. They remember what nearly destroyed them. So if domination is the machine and fellowship is the structure that resists it, then the final question becomes unavoidable. What does it cost to carry the future without becoming its tyrant? That's where Tolkien leaves us. Why the world is saved, but the heroes are changed. And that is the blueprint. That is the map this book offers us. The most radical thing Tolkien does at the end of Lord of the Rings is not destroy the ring. It's the refusal to let that be the end. Because Tolkien understands something modern culture keeps trying to outrun. Survival is not the same as healing. I cannot tell you how much that statement fucking grabbed me. And it has absolutely rocked my world in this last year. Survival is not the same as healing. This is not literary flourish. It's a diagnosis. It's the kind you can feel in your own nervous system when you scroll the news and you realize your body is bracing for impact, even on a quiet day. We live in an era where everything is pitched as a climax. The election, the crash, the war, the scandal, the breaking story, the final ruling, the next existential threat. But the truth of modern life is that many of us are not living through one emergency. We are living through what researchers call chronic stress exposure at social scale, and in a landscape of trust that keeps fracturing. Recent reporting on Gallup polling shows a steep decline in trust and confidence in institutions among young Americans, including the sense of personal freedom and stress levels. Confidence in the U.S. judicial system has also fallen sharply in recent years. And per Gallup, reporting summarized in late 2024, broader trust tracking like Edelman's has documented erosion in trust across institutions during crisis periods with misinformation and polarization as accelerants. Again, this isn't a left-right problem. This is a legitimacy problem, a coherence problem. Tolkien's ending is basically a field guide for what happens next after the quote-unquote win, when the world is still changed and you still have to live inside of it. The myth of the clean win keeps failing us. In most narratives, victory restores order. The heroes return home, the world snaps back. Tolkien refuses that because he lived through a century where that story became propaganda. After World War I and World War II, people wanted meaning badly. They wanted resolution. They wanted to believe sacrifice purchased restoration. But Tolkien knew what veterans and survivors only can know. You can end the external threat and still carry an internal war. Modern clinical frameworks use the term moral injury to describe distress that can follow exposure to events that violate a person's moral expectations, whether through what they did, what they witnessed, or what they were forced to accept. A 2025 clinical psychology review also describes moral injury as involving impairing moral emotions and beliefs and threats to meaning and purpose. That's Frodo, my friend. Not traumatized because he's weak, traumatized because he carried something no human psyche is built to carry cleanly. And Tolkien is telling the truth we keep needing to hear. You can be right, you can be brave, you can win, and you can still be fucked up by what it took. It's not pessimism, it's capacity. It's just being real. It's maturity. That's why you can't trust anyone over 30. The cost of carrying the ring, of accepting this mission, of doing your best. Frodo survives, but he doesn't recover. This is Tolkien shattering the hero myth. He doesn't announce that he's doing it. And it's the quietest but most poignant move in the whole trilogy. Frodo simply cannot return to normal. Normal is a story for people who did not touch the ring. He's not broken, but he's different. And this is where the book becomes a blueprint for leadership, not just fantasy. Modern leadership is increasingly ring adjacent. The burden of constant decisions, permanent urgency, responsibility without end, public performance layered on top of moral stress. People are being asked to carry too much alone for too long while pretending it's sustainable. Tolkien says it isn't. So Frodo leaves, not because he failed, but because staying would require denial, and denial is how corruption re-enters. The scouring of the Shire. This is the lie Tolkien refuses to tell. And this chapter was everything. It's the part most interpretations, most retellings, most summaries avoid because it kind of ruins the dopamine of a clean ending. The Shire is not spared because it is small. It is invaded because domination is portable. Sauron doesn't need a throne. He needs bureaucracy, compliance, petty enforcement, and fear disguised as order. The most chilling thing about the scouring is not violence. It is the administrative tone. Rules, permits, gatekeepings, collaborators. This is just how it is now. Tolkien is saying something incredibly current. You can defeat the Dark Lord abroad and import his methods at home. You can overthrow a regime and still build an internal culture of surveillance, coercion, and cynicism. This is why this book belongs beside Orwell and Huxley, and why it closes the season. Orwell showed the surveillance state. Huxley showed sedated compliance. Bulgakov showed moral cowardice and bureaucratic systems. Saint-Exupéry showed the loss of human heart to machine logic. Le Guin showed shadow inside the leader. Tolkien shows us the final boss, the post-victory relapse. The moment you think you're safe and the machine returns wearing the mask of normal operations. Why heroes don't stay heroes or become institutions. After the scouring, the heroes do not become permanent rulers. The choice is not quaint, it's the antidote. Because saviors who become institutions turn into the next ring, even when they start as liberators. Tolkien refuses permanence as a leadership model. This is a blueprint for any era struggling with concentrated power, including our own. Trust declines, legitimacy fractures. People look for strong figures, fast solutions, someone to just fix it. Tolkien's answer is no. Not because leadership is bad, because concentration is. The future is made by stewards, not heroes. The future is Sam. Sam sticks around, and this matters more than any coronation. Sam returns to ordinary life. He gardens, he builds community, he raises children, he serves. That sounds small until you understand that Tolkien is proposing a theory of civilization. A society survives domination not through permanent crisis posture, but through the restoration of daily coherence, food, land, relationships, repair. This is where hope becomes practical, not sentimental. Hope is not believing everything will be fine. Hope is learning how to live in a world that will not be fine and refusing to let that turn you into the thing you hate. You know I'm going to repeat that one. Hope is learning how to live in a world that will not be fine for a while and refusing to let that turn you into the thing you hate. This is where we say, so what? And so what right now? In this modern world, we keep trying to solve legitimacy crises with more machinery, more platforms, more metrics, more enforcement, more speed, more control, more optimization. But social science keeps repeating a very boring truth. Societies and teams function when trust and social cohesion exist. Work on social capital documents long-term declines in civic participation and trust and argues these relationships affect opportunity, resilience, and community outcomes. Economics research has also documented declines in generalized trust and explores implications for how institutions function. At the organizational level, research on psychological safety shows that when people perceive that their environments are safe for interpersonal risk, teams learn better and perform better. This all matters because in high stress environments, people start telling the truth. They stop surfacing weak signals. They stop challenging bad decisions. That is how Mordor wins without even marching an army. Tolkien's blueprint is not be nice. It is build conditions where truth can circulate without punishment. That is the fellowship. It's not vibes. It's architecture. It's by design. Hope, success, and visionary leadership in a world that is burning. That's what Tolkien is handing us right now. Refuse the ring logic. Do not let urgency become a permanent justification for overriding ethics, consent, or relationship. That is how domination reproduces. That's what I've been talking about all year in the loop. Every moment gives you an opportunity to tap back into what matters to you most, your values. And yeah, it's going to be slow and hard and effortful and challenging. And those all have like their own implications. And in every moment, you have the opportunity, the disciplined choice for hope. Stop worshiping the savior, the daddies. Stop waiting for something outside of you. If your plan requires one exceptional person to hold the system together, your plan is the ring. Distributed leadership isn't trendy. It's resilient. Expect the scouring. In fact, plan for it. Victory does not end the machine. It changes its costume. Prepare for the relapse into bureaucracy, control, and quiet coercion after the big win. Build cultural antibodies. Build relationship and connection with people who feel different in every way. Normalize moral injury. Leaders and builders carry psychic cost. Pretending they don't is how burnout becomes policy. Moral injury research makes clear that meaning, trust, and identity can be damaged by what people witness and endure. Your job is not to toughen up. Your job is to metabolize the cost so you do not pass it down as control. We've got to stop expecting people to endure what we've endured. Just because you did it doesn't mean they have to either. And I see this is systemic. Build shire systems, local coherence, real relationships, the daily practices of repair, not because the world is small, but because human beings are. The future is built by stewards. That's not fantasy, my friend. That's the grown-up version of hope. The Lord of the Rings is not about winning. It's a story about ending cycles, ending the cycle of domination, ending the fantasy of pure power, ending the belief that salvation comes without cost. And then, crucially, it shows what leadership looks like after the quest. The future belongs to the people who carry responsibility without turning it into domination. And then, when it's time, they let it go. That's not an ending, my friend. That is the model. So this isn't a call to optimism. It's a call to competence. Tolkien isn't giving us a fantasy to escape like he was accused of at the time of writing. He, I believe, is giving us a blueprint for how to live, how to lead, and how to create after you've seen how bad it can get. So here's the blueprint, okay? Hope is not positive thinking. It is architecture. It is discipline. It is structural. Tolkien's version of hope has nothing to do with believing things will work out. Hope in The Lord of the Rings is the refusal to let domination logic become normal. That matters right now because we are swimming in inevitability narratives. This is just how it works. There's no alternative. We don't have time. This is necessary. That language is the ring warming up. It's all the little elven letters becoming visible. Hope in Tolkien's framework looks like this. Refuse shortcuts that require ethical questions, ethical erosion. Refusing speed that destroys relationship, refusing scale that eliminates feedback. That is not naive. It is anti-fragile. Research across sociology, organizational behavior, and political economy consistently shows that systems collapse not because they lack intelligence, but because they lose trust, truth flow, and local accountability. When people stop believing their actions matter, disengagement and dysfunction follow. Hope is the practice of keeping meaning local and consequence visible. Build small enough that you can still hear dissent. Move slow enough that you can still correct course. Design systems where no one becomes indispensable. That's not weakness. That's survivability. Success is not scale. It is coherence over time. Modern culture equates success with expansion. More users, more influence, more revenue, more reach, more. Tolkien is an anti-growth. He is anti-unrestrained growth. He's anti-no limits. Every structure that falls in The Lord of the Rings falls because it tries to become too much too fast with too little restraint. Mordor scales, Isengard scales. The Shire does not. That's not nostalgia. That's systems theory. Success in Tolkien's world is the ability to endure without reproducing the conditions that created the crisis in the first place. Sound familiar? That means success looks boring by modern standards. It looks like trust that compounds slowly, institutions that step back instead of entrench, leaders who leave instead of consolidate. This means we measure success by what remains intact, not what explodes or breaks. We ask not how quickly can this grow, but at what will this growth cost? Design exists, handoffs and endings from the beginning. If your version of success requires permanent urgency, permanent visibility, or permanent control, Tolkien would tell you the ring is already on. I think lastly, visionary leadership is not command. It is stewardship with limits. This is Tolkien's most countercultural offering. Visionary leadership is not about seeing farther than everyone else. It is about knowing where not to go. The leaders Tolkien trusts are not the boldest. They're not the ones who can tolerate ambiguity without reaching. The leaders Tolkien trusts most are not the boldest. They are the ones who can tolerate ambiguity without reaching for domination. The ones who can carry responsibility without converting it into authority. The ones who know when to act and when to refuse action. Gandalf refuses power. Aragorn waits. Sam returns to ordinary life. This is not accidental. Modern leadership culture trains people to centralized brand, perform, and optimize themselves into indispensability. Tolkien calls that corruption. Visionary leadership in this framework looks like distributing decision-making instead of hoarding it, protecting truth flow over time management and image management, and stepping aside when the role has done its work. That's not anti-leadership. It is leadership that doesn't rot. So what does that mean? That means build teams that can disagree and fuck up without punishment. Normalize handoffs instead of glorifying endurance, and treat your role as temporary, not an identity. The goal is not to be the hero of the story. The goal is to leave behind a system that doesn't need one. So here's the through line, my friend, and we are nearly there. Why this works when everything feels unstable. Across this entire series, you've been tracing the same truth from different angles. Brave New World showed us comfort is control. 1984 showed us fear is domination. The Master and Margarita showed us moral cowardice under bureaucracy. The Little Prince showed us what happens when we lose wonder. Earthsea showed us the shadow leaders refuse to face. And The Lord of the Rings shows us what happens after we know all that. It asks the final, most important question yet. What kind of people, systems, and leaders can live with power without becoming possessed by it? The answer is not purity. It is practice, not ideology structure, not optimism stewardship. Tolkien doesn't promise that the world will be saved forever. He promises something more challenging, but more useful. Cycles can be ended. Domination isn't inevitable. And ordinary people acting with restraint, relationship, and courage can carry the future without owning it. That's not fantasy. That's the architecture. That's the blueprint. That's what you can use. So here we are. At the end of the road, Tolkien wanted us to walk down carefully. The ring is gone, the enemy defeated, the world still standing. But if you've been paying any attention, you already know the truth Tolkien refuses to sugarcoat. The world doesn't end when crisis does, but it does change. And this is where fantasy stops being about escapism and starts becoming instruction. Tolkien doesn't leave us with a victory parade. He leaves us with responsibility, with discipline. The heroes disperse, the power withdraws, the magic recedes, and ordinary life resumes. Different, quieter, heavier, with this shared memory. And that's the beginning of the next adventure. That's the calling. This wasn't about if you can survive, but whether you can rebuild without repeating what you've learned and what you've experienced. Across this system in this series, we've traced the same warning again and again. Control feels very comfortable. Certainty offers us something that we really seek out and want. Fear, in fact, subscribes us to that control and that order. And efficiency feels like certainty, feels good. But each time, fantasy is going to step in and say, the future isn't saved by fear or control or efficiency or domination, no matter how benevolent it sounds. It's saved by restraint, by connection, by people who know when to act and when to refuse. And that's what Tolkien leaves us with. Not hope is optimism, hope is discipline. If I were a normal podcaster, I would have stopped long ago, but I'm not. And Tolkien didn't either, because after the quest comes the harder work. After the world is saved comes the question of meaning. After the power is destroyed comes the danger of forgetting. So I'll leave you with this. The story you think you just finished isn't quite done. There's one more thing we need to go through, one more door to open, one more reminder. I have some questions for you. You don't need to answer me. You don't even need to share your answers. You just need to tell yourself the truth. Where in your life are you being tempted by ring logic? Where does speed feel more appealing than discipline? Where does just this once sound reasonable? Where are potentially you giving away responsibility to one? Or where are you not offering to share responsibility and carry it with your fellowship? What are you holding on to that was never meant to be permanent? Not because you're weak, just simply because you're human. What would it look like to name the cost of that weight instead of muscling through it? Where are you mistaking domination for leadership? A lot of you just went, ooh. Domination in your work, domination in your relationships, domination in your body, domination in your creativity. Where are you trying to control outcomes instead of stewarding process? What does, air quotes, the Shire look like for you right now? What are the small, ordinary relational systems that actually keep you sane? And what would it mean to protect those instead of sacrificing them to urgency? If your quest ended tomorrow, who would you choose to be after? Not the hero, not the savior, but the steward, the gardener, the one who stays and rebuilds with hope. I'll leave you with that, because the most radical thing Tolkien ever suggested wasn't how to win. It was how to live after. And if you've been feeling like none of this is working anymore, none of the old stories mean anything anymore, the systems are exhausted, and like something new is being asked to be imagined, I agree with you. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for building with me. See you next year.